and you actually were studying to become an investment banker before you started change.org. So tell us how you went from investment banking to social entrepreneurship. What sparked that change in you?
Well, for the first 20 years of my life, I thought I wanted to be an investment banker. It actually came from when I was a kid watching the movie Wall Street, wanting to walk down on Wall Street with a double-breasted suit and money in my pockets. And the first thing that chipped away at this idea of myself as an investment banker was when I was actually a junior in college in Washington, D.C. And I tell this story to the program organizer about how I wanted to go make a ton of money as an investment banker and then retire at age 30 and then go, do the things I wanted to do in my life. And she retorted, what if you had a job you never wanted to retire from? And it literally had been the first time I'd ever considered that. And she said, well, that's the job I have. And I've had it for 35 years. An incredibly inspiring woman. And for the first time in my life recognized that my pursuit should be more not what I wanted to do for 10 years, but what I want to do my entire life. And it really changed the trajectory of what I wanted to do in the future.
So talk to us about the vision, the mission, the objective behind change.org. I know it's about giving power to the people, if you will. So explain exactly how you do that through the website, and then a little bit about how you've had to tweak the process over time.
And the mission of the organization is to empower people to create the change they want to see. It's about a very simple platform that allows people to come together, to start petitions around any issue they care about, very local oftentimes in scope, to share that petition with friends and to build micro movements around them, whether to save a local park or stop a foreclosure of a home or change a corporate policy. And we started with a much more complicated apparatus, something very sophisticated with huge numbers of features around fundraising and political organizing and skills-based volunteerism. And what we found over time was actually the simplest thing, right? Online petitions were the most powerful because they were the most accessible. And it's been petitions over the past few years that have made the site go viral and successful as it's been.
So now, changing the world is a lofty goal and something that many before you have tried to do on a global scale, local and global. So talk a minute about how you've succeeded where others have failed in creating either global or local change opportunities, and what makes change.org so different from what has come before.
One of the difficulties historically with building social movements has been the barriers to collective action, to organizing people together. Just without technology, incredibly difficult, time-intensive, expensive to go door to door, to go friend to friend, and try to mobilize people for collective action. And technology reduces those collective action costs, makes it easier than ever before to mobilize people for common cause, for collective interests. And that, specifically has only been possible over the past 5 to 10 years. So historically, the reason why movements have taken so long and how there have been so few is simply the lack of technical ability to mobilize people at scale. And the difference with us is not just the use of technology, which again, you could have done 5 or even 10 years before, but the combination of technology and personal stories. And that is such a powerful component of why we've been successful. It's not organizations just starting petitions. It's not national campaigns building just national movements. It's people who are directly impacted by issues, whose kids are being kicked out of the Boy Scouts because they're gay, whose house is being foreclosed, whose kids are subject to bad food in local schools. It's those people starting petitions with personal stories that are spreading like wildfire, gaining media attention, and having real-time impact.
I want to expand on this because a lot of businesses people are listening to that they run are also driven by technology opportunities and social media and story and trying to do things to make an impact, make a difference. So this idea of using technology to mobilize people, I know that change.org platform kind of rests on that idea of going viral in a social media and social networking driven world. So break down for us your take on, again, the power of technology, specifically social media, to do good for humanity. And then share a story or 2 or 3 of the best examples of what's sort of happened that probably couldn't have happened before because of technology as well as because of change.org.
I think one of the things we see that's most consistent is this power of personal story, of how the irony is technology, though some people talk about how it divides us, how it makes us almost atomized individuals, that actually it's the best platform ever invented for elevating incredible personal stories and spreading them virally. And if you look at people's behavior online using social media, the things they're most likely to share aren't about an organization's message, isn't sort of bland advertisement. It's how products or services or social justice impacts real people's lives. And those are the things, the stories that spread, that people want to tell their friends through Twitter, through Facebook, and through blogs. And we've seen this in many different cases. The first campaign that went truly viral on Change.org, that really illustrated to us the power of personal narratives, was in of all places in South Africa. And it's really a tragic story, but a remarkable one, where it was a woman who was walking down the street in Cape Town, and she gets grabbed and she was thrown into a shack and she was raped and almost killed. And the reason is she's a lesbian woman and the man was trying to turn her straight. It's this awful thing called corrective rape in South Africa, and it happened about 10 times a week in Cape Town alone. And in response, a friend of hers, instead of reacting with a sense of lack of power, she starts a petition in an internet cafe outside of Cape Town, and unexpectedly gets 170,000 people from 150 countries in a week time. And because of that, mobilizes the press like never before in South Africa to expose this issue. She mobilizes people in front of parliament in the hundreds. And after a month of campaigning, after decades of entirely ignoring the issue, the government passes a national task force to investigate and to stop the incidents of corrective rape in that country. And it was an amazing illustration of someone who looks to me almost the least powerful person in that country, running the most effective campaign in the history of the government action. And the reason it was so powerful wasn't her personal relationships. It wasn't even the issue itself. It was her personal story. Corrective rape, this awful thing in South Africa, wasn't new. It had been happening for long periods of time. And people around the world didn't have any personal, natural connection to the issue. But it was a story of Ndume, this woman, Ndume Funda, her personal struggle, her photo, her voice. It was that spread around the world, despite starting in an obscure place in Cape Town, South Africa. And since then, we've seen this incredible rise of personal voices of people who previously felt like they had no power, because the amplification potential of social media and the web spreading stories like never before.
I've heard that story before, which is so powerful. And I know that it's sort of been the centerpiece from the beginning of Change.org. I'd be interested in having our listeners hear one or two other more recent stories as well, so that they have more context for kind of how it works at Change.org. And then I think it also will seed the ideas of how they can also get their own personal story out there as well. So what are a couple of other examples of things that have happened like that? Because that's a very powerful story.
One of the more recent campaigns that took off was around the Boy Scouts of America across the United States. And it's a great illustration around the power of local distributed organizing. And so, historically, the Boy Scouts haven't let LGBT members into the Scouts. No gay Scouts were able to be members. And there have been organizations that have been fighting this for a long time, all the way to the Supreme Court in 2000. And there was almost no action until about a year ago. There was a woman, Jennifer Tyrell, who was a den mother in Ohio. And she had been asked by her community to be a den mother despite being a gay mom who had a 7-year-old kid who was in the Cub Scouts. And because of that, she's found out by the National Boy Scouts and she gets kicked out of the Scouts, which wasn't new. This had been happening again for decades. But what was new was the potential for her to start a petition to tell her story and to spread this nationally like never before. And she got 300,000 people to join her. It became this real national narrative about the issue of the Boy Scouts, not fighting just, gay Scouts, but fighting women like Jennifer Tyrell, who you could personally develop a relationship with. And that initial campaign then spawned hundreds of campaigns around the country in local contexts, with Eagle Scouts and Scout parents starting petitions asking their own troop leaders to come out against the anti-gay policy. And it's only because this wildfire effect of hundreds of people starting petitions all around the country, chipping away at local levels, that have built this national movement of more than 2 million people, ultimately, that convinced the Boy Scouts over the period of a year to end its anti-gay policy. And the reason I mention that campaign is it's a great illustration of how, traditionally speaking, people think of movements as only big national campaigns, a single petition to Congress or to the UN or to the president. But what's most powerful oftentimes are these local campaigns, and not just one in a single community, but hundreds of petitions and hundreds of local communities that themselves, through small actions and grassroots, build national movements. And we see that happening more and more every day.
I just want to be sure that people's brains are not getting stuck here in this idea that this is one side of the aisle or another, whether it be liberal or conservative or Republican or Democrat, because people always just get so stuck there in that spot. Because what I love about this is that it eliminates control of access, right? And that's what technology has done and has obliterated, where a few people are controlling access to communication or access to resources or talent or supply or what have you. And this eliminates that control of access. So really, anything that people really care about either gets momentum or it doesn't. It's apolitical, right? So how can you speak to this issue that this is not one side of the aisle in politics, that this is really about power to the people, and whatever the people end up caring about gets momentum or it doesn't, period?
One of the things that's really powerful about the platform we built is that we're not an advocacy organization ourselves. That we are truly a platform that's open and nonpartisan and enables anyone to start a campaign around any issue they care about. One of the most powerful campaigns we've seen recently was actually a veteran in Afghanistan. And this veteran had an Afghan interpreter who had risked his life in actually assisting the U.S. Sort of invasion and war. And because of that, was subject to potentially retaliatory effects from the Taliban. And so this veteran comes back to the States and is disappointed that this interpreter isn't able to come back and sort of have asylum in the U.S. And so starts a petition asking for the asylum of his interpreter in Afghanistan. This incredible sort of personal connection he felt when he went there, and the person who really saved his life. And it was only because of tens of thousands of people joining this petition in unison that got awareness with the military. And actually just recently, the asylum of this interpreter in Afghanistan was approved because of it. And it's a great example of how people in all different domains, veterans, moms, conservatives, progressives, kids and the elderly, all starting petitions around the issues they care about and sort of disintermediating traditional sources of power to advance change.
That is an amazing story, Ben. Do you have a few others that you could share with us that really speak to you personally and that demonstrate the diverse nature of the petitions on change.org?
Some of the most powerful examples we've seen recently are of small business owners starting petitions, either in response to regulations they think are impeding their ability to run their business, or simply that they think would be better for allowing them to sort of serve their local communities. One of the campaigns I like the most, I wake up in San Francisco in the morning and I see a petition from a coffee house that wants to have better seating outside on the street. And there had been a local regulation in San Francisco that sort of restricted companies' ability to have this, to sort of serve their customers. And they were using a petition tool to be able to organize their customers together to sort of raise awareness, to let the city government know that it was important that citizens be able to have a more public space in front of the restaurant, the coffee house in this case, that they loved. And so you see businesses more and more every day recognizing the power of actually mobilizing their own customers for changing the way local governments regulate their own behavior. What I'll also say is one of my favorite campaigns actually was around a veteran who had come back from Iraq and who had decided to build a treehouse for his kids just outside of DC. And he builds this beautiful treehouse in the corner, and he's got 2 kids in it, and he gets slapped with a fine from the local government that says you can't build an official treehouse. It looks like a real house, and so has to go through all this red tape. And this other Iraq War veteran sees this in the media, responds, starts a petition to the Fairfax City Council, which had been placing this regulation in defense of this Iraq War veteran, and mobilized a ton of the people in the community and embarrassed the city council, and actually got the city council to approve the treehouse and to change this regulation that allowed parents, and in many cases veteran fathers who are coming home, build these tree houses for their kids to be able to play and to enjoy their kids when they're finally back home from war. The irony is that the most powerful campaigns in many ways are those that are just not political. I mean, most people, most of the time, don't wake up every day thinking about politics. It's about things in their own daily life, in their school, in their city, in their town, in their business. And it's those campaigns that are, that are overwhelmingly started on the site that go viral and that change people's lives. And I think that's a huge important message, not just for people, but for politicians who think that they're the end-all be-all of social change. But the reality is people with their own tools can make change outside traditional venues of power.
That's excellent. I love those stories. So now I want to focus in on the key point that you mentioned that makes these movements possible, which is really the personal story. And that's the lesson, I think, even if it's an entrepreneur listening here who is got a great solution, right? They're providing a solution to the marketplace, and the lessons that are making a change.org social movement successful are the same lessons that can be applied to an entrepreneurial endeavor that has a great solution to a marketplace. And what you're saying is that it's really about that personal story. So can you just give us some of the core fundamentals that makes these personal stories come alive to the audience where they want to rise up and take action on something that they are hearing or seeing?
We find that there are two primary important aspects of running an effective movement through personal stories. The first is simple authenticity. It seems basic, but it proves true every single time. Speaking with a personal voice, not an organizational voice. So I'll give you an example. There's actually a lot of regulations in cities across America right now around this collaborative consumption, sort of the shared economy work. And there's a company called Sidecar that's all about sort of peer-to-peer sharing for what effectively used to be taxis and now is sort of the ability to leverage existing cars on the road. And the company was facing regulation in Austin, Texas. And instead of starting its own petition as an organization, the CEO of the company started the petition and told his story about the importance he thinks in sustainability in the future of cities and how sort of he and his kids, he wants to see the future of cities be shared assets, be more ecologically sustainable. And so it wasn't about the self-interest of a company. It was that the person behind the company, the founder who started in part because inspiration from his own children, inspiration for sustainability in the future of the economy of local cities. It's with that voice that he spoke, and it becomes much more raw, much more personal, much more likely to spread. And the second thing that's key is not just rooting it in personal story, but making it specific and winnable. And so it's not a petition through that personal story to change the national regulation around shared economy car sharing. It's rather in a very specific context in a particular city that within a short period of time is winnable. And so people don't just connect to your personal story, but you can see the connection between that personal story and real change in a short period of time. And those two principles are the most powerful we've seen for affecting real change.
Fantastic. So I want to take this now into creating action, actually mobilizing people, because without people taking action, change.org doesn't exist. It doesn't thrive. So tell us about how you motivate and inspire people to take action on what they believe in and to start a petition to try to make a difference, similar to what you did when you started change.org. What are some of those key factors to trying to motivate and inspire people to actually do something?
I think the biggest barrier that we face, the biggest barrier that anyone trying to build social movements faces, is people's belief in their own power to make a difference. I think historically speaking, we get a lot of criticism from my generation of being apathetic. And I think it's less apathy and more disillusionment. People, participating in sort of social action, but seeing that they don't think they can make a difference. Every time they sign a petition, it seems to fail. Every time they vote, it seems to not matter. And it's that cultural barrier that we're fighting, I think, most. And what we do to fight it is we tell stories. We tell the story through the press of amazing, ordinary people doing extraordinary things and winning campaigns every day. And it's those stories that give people a sense of their own power, that enable them to recognize that they can come together around the issues they care about to advance real change. The first step is convincing people it is possible. The second step we see is giving people opportunity to participate in a campaign that they think is believably going to win. A campaign that doesn't seem too aspirational, it doesn't seem too inaccessible, that seems too global, but rather something local, that there's tangible. It may be change in their local community, in their school, in their city, or in the business that they work in. And giving people opportunities for that small impact both gives them visibility to possible change, as well as it increases the chance they're going to win. And by winning, it inspires them to participate more in the future.
So like business owners who have a revolutionary vision, they want to do something significant in the marketplace or even for the world through their business, you have naysayers and skeptics like lots of business owners have. What do you say to the skeptics out there who look at what you're trying to do and say, there's no way possible for one person to make a difference like that?
Yeah, historically there's been a real dispute about something called slacktivism, this sort of dismissive way of criticizing activists online as simply clicking buttons and not having real impact. And 5 years ago, that was a legitimate debate. And there's a lot of theory back and forth thrown. And the best way to fight theory isn't with more theory, but with data. And that's what we now have. We have incredible data at more than a dozen times a day. There are campaigns that win on the site that change local regulations, that pass national laws, that shift policies of major multinational corporations. And it's those examples, that data, that is the most important thing to bear to show people that it is true that people can make a difference. And I think one of the challenges that we face is spreading that message, spreading the word, illuminating all the positive things that are happening by people taking action online. I think if we do that, we get better at spreading that word, we're going to be able to sort of undercut the popular notion that just by clicking things online, you can't make a difference.
Let's take this naysayer and skeptic battle that goes on with anybody who's trying to do something for change. Change is unsettling for lots of people, and so people will come out of the woodwork as naysayers and skeptics once you do try to change the status quo. So I want to ask you about some of the negative reactions and feedback that there's been to change.org. There are those out there who tout that your efforts on the site are sexist or racist or overall biased. Explain how you've dealt with such strong negative reactions to your efforts, because I know that there are entrepreneurs and business owners out there that are trying to do great things in the world that will have to have some of the same battles. And maybe you could share how you've handled a specific situation where this type of feedback arose.
I think a truism in business is the more successful you are, the more critique you're likely to face, even if it's a minority of the overall public narrative. And we've certainly faced this in one respect, primarily where people don't fully recognize that we are not behind the campaigns that start on the site. We are truly an open platform in a similar way that YouTube is, where we take no more responsibility for the campaigns that are posted on change.org than YouTube does and the videos posted on YouTube. But that's new. That's a shift. Historically, organizations have always been the ones that started their own online campaigns or offline campaigns. They've been responsible for the movements that exist on the platforms that they build. And so I think that one of the challenges we face is communicating this new mode of empowerment. If instead of an organization initiating social movements, that we're actually a platform empowering, giving other people the ability to run their own movements on the platform, the technology that we've built. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that we're doing. And it's not always pretty. It's sometimes very messy. It means there's going to be tons of disagreement. We have 25,000 new petitions started every month. Inevitably, some are going to abrade or chide others and make them react with negativity. But we think the sort of messiness of free speech is much more powerful than sort of the cleanness of censorship, of having just a single voice and a single perspective. And I think that we deal best with this by just being raw and transparent and explaining to the world who we are and what we do. And the better we do at that, the more open, the more transparent, the more direct and effective we are communicating, the more people will understand that we're an empowerment platform and not an advocacy organization.
I hope that people really hear what you said, because it's difficult to understand the wisdom in what you said without sort of a specific context. Because I know I sit on the board of several nonprofit organizations and organizations that are doing incredibly important work in the world. And a lot of times some of the naysayers make the most incredible, inane attacks. And it's infuriating when you know the heart and mind and attention of the people behind the organization. It's difficult to keep yourselves unhooked emotionally from those kinds of attacks. And what you're saying is let it all exist. Do not try to get hooked into it. Because again, there are entrepreneurs in their own businesses that will receive these incredible, unfair, a lot of times, and sometimes just crazy attacks and a negative bent on what it is that you're trying to do. So you've been there. Any other advice that you would give others about kind of how to deal with this emotionally?
Yeah, there's two aspects that I talk to a lot of sort of younger social entrepreneurs about. One is to expect bad things to happen. Life is not going to be perfect. It's not going to be pristine, and it won't always go your way. And if you expect it is going to, then the first moment it doesn't, it's going to be far more painful than it should be. And so first, it's just about expectation. This is part of the game. And the second is recognizing it's, again, the more successful you are, the more attacks you're likely to attract. And it's actually perversely, in some ways, an affirmation of the impact that you're making. If you don't matter, no one will bother to criticize you. But the more you matter, the more you're going to attract a lot of attention, and people will try to knock you down. And if you recognize that is an inevitable part of success.
Everything. But that's what actually can really derail you, right? If you think everything's going to be great and then somebody comes out and attacks you and it's unexpected, that is what really can cripple you. But if you expect that's going to happen, then when it happens in your mind, you can go, hi, they told me you would say that, and it no longer has the same emotional power. And then when you do get attacked, as you had said, celebrate it. It's a sign that you are ascending, right? That your voice is being heard and that you are obviously succeeding, because the more you succeed, the more people will celebrate the fact that it must be working. So I really appreciate that advice. So as we start to wind up here, as I mentioned to you several times, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs listening today, and essentially what you have done is very, very entrepreneurial. So what other lessons can you help directly translate to those that are listening in a business context? You know, when it comes to championing a message, using modern tools, audience engagement, building and moving a tribe to action, etc. Are there 2 or 3 other thoughts as you think about it from an entrepreneurial context that you could pass along to our listeners here?
So we talk about 3 things that I think are most powerful for an effective venture right now, using technology in particular. The first is the imperative of never, 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 never giving up. It literally took us 4.5 years to have any almost modicum of success. We tried a tremendous number of different iterations of Change.org until we finally hit the first viral campaign. And it was only because of the intense commitment we had to do whatever necessary to succeed that we were able to emerge from those very long, deep, dark days. And the second thing is, the reason we were able to be so intense, so dedicated, is because we thought what we're doing, and we think we're still doing, is the most important work we could possibly be dedicating ourselves to in the world. That intense passion for our work, the commitment we have, derives from a sense of real purpose, real internal mission that drives me, my co-founder, and our team every day. And the third thing we found is authenticity. Is not just being authentic to yourselves, but also to your users, your consumers. You know, when we started opening up the organization, opening up the platform, trusting people, and being really transparent as an organization, in particular in a world in which social media drives so much of the conversation, it's that when we started really building movements. We started to really be open and transparent with people. And I think that's a lesson for, frankly, all businesses. And we see businesses that are being petitioned on a daily basis. The more open, authentic, and vulnerable they are, the more they admit in some cases their failures or enlist the support of their own consumers to help them be better, the more successful they are.
So I've got one last question for you today, Ben, as we start to wrap up our life-changing time together here today. You certainly are an inspiring individual. Your company and what it does inspires thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people regularly as well. If there's somebody listening who has it in their heart to do something important, really, really meaningful, aside from going to your site, change.org, give us another way that we might help others do the impossible and change our individual realities and our local communities. What would you suggest to that person who's in front of you and says, I really want to do something important and meaningful in the world? Give me some guidance, because you've been there and you've traveled the road. What do I need to do, and what do I need to look out for?
I think one of the things that's most powerful is the recognition that our power as individuals is not in working individually, but in mobilizing like-minded people to work together with us for effective change. And so what I tell people is on the local scale, you can have more impact than you can possibly imagine. And the way you do so is, in some cases, walking up to a friend, talking to someone on the phone or in the mall about an issue you care about, and actually mobilizing people even face-to-face in local contexts. And in many cases, that's enormously powerful. We even see online tools being effective at facilitating offline engagement as well, and in meetings. But I think that people getting together in local contexts with friends in many cases, that's the root of many movements. That's the root of what starts as local change and over years can turn into national movements. That's one. And the second thing I would mention to entrepreneurs about the impact they can make in the world is to look not too far away from their own company. If you look at the way people impact the world around them, the biggest impact in many cases is that which is closest to them. You know, people who employ 1 or 2 or 10 or hundreds of people have immense impact on the lives of their own staff members. And that's oftentimes overlooked. There's a movement afoot, I think, that's going to be huge in the next decade around conscious capitalism, around it's not just important what you do in the world, what you sell, what product or service you offer, but how you do it, how you treat your employees in the process of manufacturing or providing services, how you treat your customers or the vendors you engage with, or the impact on the community directly surrounding you. It's not just in the charitable dollars you're able